Okay, so resume recording. Here we go. So welcome everyone. Welcome to our CCLI 2020 workshop on Back to Basics, Designing and Assessing Library Instruction. My name is Jen Sweeney, and I'm a former reference and instruction librarian back in the day. I don't want to tell you when that time period was. It was a while ago. But I was at American University Library in Washington, D.C. for 10 years, and then at University of California, Davis for a number of years. So right now, I'm on the faculty at San Jose State and Drexel University, and I teach in the MLS programs there. I teach various foundation courses, including curriculum design. And I'm also a consultant to libraries, all kinds of libraries, on just overall planning and evaluation. You know, how are we assessing what we're doing, and are we doing what we want to be doing, kind of thing. So that's me. I'm so glad you've chosen to come and attend or view this workshop that we're recording for CCLI. You know, this is a course that's really aimed toward librarians, librarians who are starting out or who have been in the field for a while, but really feel like they need some foundation for their teaching skill. You know, a lot of us arrive pretty well prepared to work in information resources. We're good at that, but you know, we're less prepared in how to teach. And I don't see this in a lot of MLS programs. Drexel did have a course in curriculum design, but it's not in the core, so you're not required to take it. And so a lot of students, unless they know they're going to be working in instructional areas, may not attend to it. So this course is in part inspired by that class that I teach at Drexel with Delia Newman. And we've got four modules today. We're going to talk about learner-centered focus. It's really important background for why we do things the way we do in instruction. We're going to talk about how we design instruction really to benefit the learner from the learner's point of view. Much less attention on what we're teaching, but how the student is going to learn. We're going to apply some of our things that we learned today to a couple of real-world institutions. In your handouts, you'll see you've got some data on Spokane Community College and Antelope Valley College, and we're going to use those as kind of case studies for our work today. We're going to talk a little bit about assessment and evaluation of our instruction, the quality of our instruction, how people learn. And I've also provided a list of key resources at the end of the PowerPoint. And the PowerPoint handout that you have, I apologize in advance. I know some of the print is teeny tiny, but you can put it on your screen and enlarge it, or we can post a larger version of this on the website for you. So what I want to focus on, what I want to stress right here and now is that we are going to be taking this from the student's point of view. It's what they need to be learning, not what we are teaching them. We do talk about how we're teaching them. I want you to take a little mental reset right here. Stop thinking about what you want them to know. And I want you to start thinking about what they're like right now, what the learners are like right now, what they already know, what their experience is. We start with the learner, and today we're going to do, in this module, we're going to cover a little bit of learner analysis, how we look at what students are like. We're going to touch very briefly on learning theory in the context of learning styles, how people learn. And you know, a lot of this is going to seem kind of familiar to you, and at the end of our PowerPoint slide, we do have a great list of references, kind of those key foundational documents that talk in more depth and detail on these things. We just touch on them here just to bring them back into your consciousness so that you can incorporate them into your instruction design. And we talk a little bit about the context for learning. So that's the jumping off point for our work today. We're not just focusing on content, we want to focus on what the learner needs to know. So what do we need to know about our learners? You know, everyone brings something different to the classroom. My mother used to say, oh, everybody's different. You know, whenever you complain about something going on somewhere, mother would say, well, everyone's just different. You just have to deal with it. And that's so true about the students in our classroom. Sometimes we kind of look out at all the students in English 101 and they're all just kind of the same. They're all students in English 101 and we're just going to teach them something that they need to know to write that research paper. But think about them in terms of who they are and their experience. You know, if you have an adult who's never used a computer, you're going to approach instructing that person differently than you would a person who is a computer programmer who's going to be bored taking a class and learning how a computer works, right? So everybody brings their experience, their knowledge at different levels. So we have to start with that detailed understanding of where our students are coming from. So we all know we're all different, as Mom used to say. We're good at different things. Some of us enjoy reading or we don't. Some of us, we have different learning styles, and we'll get to this in more detail in a minute. Some of us are good listeners, some of us like to read, some of us have to do something with our hands or act out something. So we process, our senses process things differently. And these characteristics, we can think about them another way. They're kind of stable over time. I don't know how much a learning style, for example, would change over time. You know, chances are if you like to play the piano when you're a kid, you might still enjoy it as an adult. Or maybe if you're like me, you've got the piano and you haven't touched it in years, but you could still sit down and enjoy playing it. So in other respects, we're part of a group. We'd like to feel that we're part of a group. Kids at a certain age are kind of going to share some characteristics. People in a certain culture or on a team, they're going to share some characteristics. College undergrads might share some characteristics in terms of their after-hours behavior. Graduate students, you know, have their lives and they, you know, tend to be a little older perhaps. Doctoral students are a whole nother breed entirely, right? So we can kind of generalize a little bit about that. And we know that people change over time. We do develop over time. We learn, we have experiences that change the way we perceive the world. In many respects, we go from novice to expert. We're new at something, and as we do it more and more, we get better and better at it, and then one day we wake up and realize, oh, gee, I'm pretty good at this. I remember my first moment on the reference desk as a brand new librarian, and I was just petrified. It was just funny when I think back on it. A student came up to the desk and asked a very simple question. And I was just like deer in the headlights. I really was frozen. Fortunately, my boss was right there. He was a wonderful guy. And he just said, well, why don't you suggest the index of blah, blah, blah. You know, I hate to tell you, back in those days, we still had printed indexes. And, you know, that just served to snap me out of it. But, you know, as time went on, you answer more questions, you teach people more things, and you get better and better at it. You build that knowledge. So we do change over time. And to even make this more complicated, we do kind of parts of us stay the same over time. You know, I think about going to my high school reunion. 40th reunion not the other day, a couple of years ago. And I was just, it was so funny because people from childhood really hadn't changed. And we still had those friendships. We kind of picked up right where we left off. Those psychosocial characteristics, personalities, maybe don't change so much over time. So I want you to think about this when we think about our students. Now, I mentioned we would talk a little bit more about learning styles, which is important for teaching people. You've heard about these, I'm sure. We've got many different takes on learning styles, multiple intelligences, and there's all kinds of inventories and questionnaires out there that assess what students, how they incorporate new information. Some of us like to see things, see graphics, see visual representations of things. Some of us learn by hearing, reading, writing, kinesthetic, learn by doing, and so on. That's a very common, popular set of learning styles. So there's these references are in your reference list. If you're interested in learning more, please take the time to look into these. But it's enough for us here that we're aware of them, these clusters of traits that determine how we perceive the world, how we interpret things. And we need to understand that these exist because we need to be able to design our instructional experiences that will be meaningful to students. We need to create those situations that where individuals can interpret their information for their own use, for their own understanding. I think we all have a little bit of these different learning styles. We all can appreciate hearing things, seeing things, reading and writing about things, doing things. And I think we just need to know that for some of us, one or more of these styles is more prevalent than others. Okay, so just a little humor here. Have you ever explained something to someone, maybe a coworker, maybe a subordinate or a boss, whatever, and they go off and do something completely different than you just explained? And so this is just a funny visual that shows kind of how we hear whatever we hear, despite how it's explained, depending on where we're coming from, what our learning styles are. Okay, so we're up to activity number 1. So if you can flip through in your handout packet and you'll come to 2 pages on the Community Colleges of Spokane, Quarterly Demographics, Fast Facts, 2 pages of that, Annual Overview and Quarterly Demographics for Spokane Community College. And we also have a few pages on the Antelope Valley College at a glance, and this all provides some basic demographic information about the students in these colleges. And so what I'd like you to do, you have an activity worksheet that's 3 pages. We're going to do activity number 1 right now. And what I'd like us to do is take about 3 or 4 minutes and review the information for both these schools. So browse through it and then come back to activity number 1 worksheet and fill out this worksheet with the basic information that you've discovered about the students: their age, gender breakdown, racial ethnic groups, prior education. What are they studying? What are the main certificates or degree programs that most students are pursuing? How many are working while they're in school? And are there any kind of special populations that you can identify? So let's start the clock right now. I've got 12:18. We'll come back together at 12:21 to discuss what we found. So this is a quick exercise. Read fast, write fast. Okay, how is everyone doing? Do we need another minute or so?
I do.
Yeah, okay,
I do too.
Let's take 3 more minutes. We have time. Okay, how about we come back to the group now? Don't worry if you weren't able to finish. This is a lot to get through. It's a lot of data. So let's go around the room. Let's go in alphabetical order by our first name. So I think that would be JKL. Jenny, then Megan, then Stephanie. Jenny, maybe you could take the first 2, and then Megan the next 2, and then Stephanie the next 2. Does that sound okay? How old are the students then, Jenny?
So at Antelope Valley, most are under 24 years old. And Spokane, it's the same thing. Most are under 24 years of age, with the median age being 27. At Antelope Valley, 58% are female, 40% male. And at Spokane, 45% are female and 33% male.
Well, that's interesting. That doesn't really add up, does it?
I think some information was missing. There are a lot of unknowns in some of the data.
Yeah, did I send you guys the does it exclude not reported? I may have sent you the one that has a lot of not reports. That's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, very good, very good. Okay. How about the racial and ethnic groups, Megan?
So to me, it looked like Spokane was more majority white, whereas Antelope Valley was majority Hispanic. I just really browsed very quickly.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine. That's a really key difference. Wasn't that interesting? Hispanic was, I don't know, 50-something% at
Yes.
Antelope Valley, and in Spokane, the demographic is very different.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. So how about prior education? Do they,
So
go ahead.
I didn't see anything for Antelope Valley, but I also have trouble like reading charts quickly. So I didn't know if there was a term maybe that I didn't know that well, but I didn't see that in the Antelope Valley.
Yeah, no, you're right. They don't have that information.
Okay. So I put unknown, and then for the Spokane students, that the majority of their students were high school graduates with some post high school.
Yeah, a key thing to look for here would be the number of folks that did not graduate high school. So we've got, and it's only 1.7%, it looks like, at Spokane. Yeah. So if this were real world, we would be able to dig into this a lot more because we'd have a lot more time. Thank you. Okay, so what are they studying? Do we have a sense of what the degree programs, the top degrees or certificates?
Was that for me or for Stephanie?
Let's see. Stephanie, were you able to get to that part?
A little bit for Antelope Valley. I'm sorry, I kind of lost. I've been taking notes on it as AV, so hopefully it's Antelope Valley. Yes, it is. Okay, good. I'm staring at the slide. They're interesting in what they're pursuing. There was a justice or judicial program. There was child and family education. One thing that they shared with Spokane was a lot of business programs and nursing programs topping their list. Where Spokane differs is in their more practical element to it, the construction business, welding, working with audio engineering and automobile. It seemed to me, just as a general impression, that Antelope Valley has their bread and butter off of associates programs, almost getting to the point of promoting people to get their bachelor's, but really focusing on associates. Spokane does that too, but it seems like they're really focused on getting folks into the workforce and having kinds of programs that prepare folks for specialized work.
That's really perceptive. Wow, you really got a good deep dive into this. That's absolutely true, and that's really important to look for. And I just wanted to get this. We can get this far with this is the kind of analysis you want to be able to be doing. A lot of institutions do their own assessments on incoming students, especially at the community college level. And so you would want to get in touch with whatever entity on campus is doing those assessments. Sometimes everybody's different, but they might be looking at information on high school GPA, whether they're English language learners or not, maybe the percent coming from school districts that have a high percentage of free school lunch. That's an indicator of a socioeconomic status of somebody's community. But what else, did anything else strike you about comparing these characteristics across these two schools?
I thought it was interesting. I mean, just the breadth of what was presented. So while Spokane had like a less diverse racially and ethnically students, like they broke out so much more detail about, you know, special statuses or, you know, like, I guess they're, you know, gave so much more data about their students. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. This was a very different way of presenting the information. Could be that the Antelope Valley College is using this, their at a glance, as more of a marketing tool, and Spokane is using theirs to really crank out the information. I know we don't get average age from Antelope Valley, but you can see, as Jenny, as you pointed out, the 20 to 24 age group and 19 or under age groups, those are much higher for Antelope Valley. But if you look at the data for Spokane, that average age is quite a bit higher. You can see it's 33 as opposed, and we don't know what the average age at Antelope Valley is. We'd have to get out our calculators, and we're not going to do that here. But you can see the numbers of people who are over age 30 are quite a bit more than at Antelope Valley, and that's kind of reflected in that practical element of the courses of study, the practical element, the construction, the welding, and workforce development, and so on. So, anybody have any other thoughts they want to share about this exercise?
Well, throughout this, especially coming at it from a learner-centered angle, as I've been doing these activities, I've been thinking about what does this community expect their library to look like? And this is something we're constantly surveying, trying to get what they expect from us, and how we can best meet those expectations, but also their needs. One thing that struck me comparing these two institutions is that a predominantly Hispanic and female population will want, who's studying to be someone who helps children in the schools, will expect or want help in different ways from a student who's preparing to be an auto mechanic and maybe comes from a first generation family where none of his family has gone to college, or maybe hasn't even completed high school. So it's just interesting to take the data and assemble these sample learners and sometimes picture a classroom where they may share some things, but their differences are also striking. And it's something that I struggle with in my instruction sessions, trying to, like you said earlier, cater to the computer programmer, but also to someone who hasn't touched a keyboard before.
Absolutely. Jenny or Megan, you have any thoughts to respond or add?
I would think of those things as well as a community college librarian. You know, we see, you know, like the statistics nationally show that more women are in school. And then, you know, when we look into the actual certificate programs and who is in those, you know, it's pretty telling who's taking what. And then I just noticed that Antelope Valley also has a bachelor's degree, which is pretty rare. In nursing, which is very popular in community colleges.
Okay, well, let's move on then. Thank you so much. I hope this activity is helpful, useful, and fun. Okay, so let's move on to our next module, where we're going to talk a little bit more about how we plan the instruction. You know, the models that we use to understand learners, the tools that we use to sketch out a curriculum, the other ways we plan the activities, the materials, these all have to work together. And so we use all these different tools and techniques together to determine the activities that we're going to, and the materials we're going to need to do the instruction, how we're going to evaluate it, how we're going to assess it. Now, we've already talked about our learners, so let's move on now. Let's talk a little bit about, learning objectives. In order to be able to design activities and materials that are going to meet our need, we need to understand what we're doing, where we're going, what our end goal needs to be. So that's what you've heard of learning objectives, I'm sure. It could be a broad learning goal, an overall goal for a course or a class. But we can also think about learning objectives in terms of more specific things, what learners will be able to do to demonstrate that they've learned what you wanted them to learn. And this is going to also tie into what the characteristics of our audience is. So that's the audience part. What are the characteristics of the audience? Are we designing our learning objectives to be appropriate for them? What behaviors are they going to demonstrate? Use a verb. A student will be able to identify blah, blah, blah. What are the conditions under which the students are going to be able to demonstrate? If that's meaningful. It's not always meaningful to have to specify conditions. Say, given access to the internet, students will be able to blah, blah, blah. Identify financial resources on the internet and how to navigate them, or something of that nature. And sometimes, if appropriate, you might want to specify to what degree are they able to do whatever it is you'd like them to be able to do when you're done with your instruction. Perhaps you want them to achieve 75% or better on a skills quiz or something of that nature. Here's an example of some broader learning outcomes or objectives. These are more on the course level, but it's interesting because they're also kind of specific. And so it's very important for your course to start here, to start with a good, broad yet specific learning outcome, so that you're able to design your demonstrations and your activities to help the students learn very specifically. So you start here, and this is not for an information literacy, although actually, yes, this is nursing informatics for registered nurses. So you can see these, I'm not going to read these to you, but you can see we use action verbs: demonstrate, discuss, explain, recognize. These verbs are very important, and we'll provide a resource for finding good verbs a little later on in this module. So there's an example. And this won't be a surprise to any of us. We want to encourage that higher level learning whenever we can. It's not just about showing students how to put a citation into APA format or memorize what floor has what set of call numbers, or where the computer lab is, or what the databases cover, which databases cover what topics. You really want your students to dig in a little deeper than just this cursory tour of the library kind of thing. But you can have a series of learning outcomes at different levels. Maybe you want to start out with some lower level. Here's the floor plan of the library, and here's what we do with these other information resources like these databases. Sometimes you have to introduce new vocabulary, new terms that students haven't heard of, and so that they can understand how those terms are used and then use it themselves at the right time. Some of you may have heard of Bloom's taxonomy. This is an important, it's an important resource on levels of learning. There are many versions of Bloom's taxonomy based in different disciplines and fields. I picked this graphic because it was very clear, and it has nice little short statements that explain what each of these levels are. And I'm not going to read through them. You've heard of these, no doubt. If not, we've got a resource in the resource list that will provide more information for you on this. But, basically you need to understand that there are, very cursory, I don't want to say shallow, but surface level remembering and recognizing and recalling facts. And we have levels of depth that we have to think about things, and they get more and more complex, more higher level learning. So there are many versions of this. I wanted to include the Bloom's Taxonomy verb wheel. There are also many versions of this, and I've put the link to the one I found here. I chose it, I will tell you, I chose it because it was legible. Not that there was anything special about this, but you can see in the very center, we've got the levels of learning, and in the middle ring, in the yellow-orange ring, we have verbs that you can use to build your learning outcomes. I love this taxonomy verb wheel because I can go here and I can find these great action verbs that help me be a little more creative in designing some learning outcomes. Sometimes I don't feel very creative on my own, but if I look at a tool like this, it makes it a lot easier for me to be more creative. And then in the green outer ring, we've got products or activities that students can create or work on to help them achieve these learning outcomes. So I've provided this also in full size at the end of your handout document, because this is a great resource. When we also, in our field specifically, the Bloom's taxonomy is very broad. It's, education writ large across fields. In our field specifically for information literacy, ACRL is a wonderful source. I don't even know that I've got the most recent information literacy framework here, but this is, sort of the frames of areas of knowledge that we want to help students grasp. And please do go to the website. There's a lot behind each of these frames. Notice I put a second link here to a Fordham LibGuide. And the reason for that is for the past couple of weeks, I've been getting this message. When you try to go to certain places on the ALA website, you get a message that says, sorry, we're not here right now. So I'll go back here. So anyway, this Fordham LibGuide is great. There are so many of these out here. You could just, in the search engine of your choice, put in information literacy framework or competency or something of that nature, and you'll get many choices. One of the resources in your resource list is the Gracian and Kaplowitz reference. It's a little dated, but it's just got such a great compilation of a lot of the basic tools and techniques and models that we're talking about today. So I encourage you to go find one. You can probably get one at a good price on Amazon at this point. So you wouldn't attempt to cover this whole framework in one instructional session or course. I think there are things here that are applicable depending on what your overall learning goal is. Okay, so I just wanted to go quickly through a bad example of really a poorly constructed learning outcome. So let's think about this for 30 seconds. Using their hands, the students will be able to clap the rhythm of Mary Had a Little Lamb with 90% accuracy. So let's think about the problems with this learning outcome. On the surface, it seems okay. It's like, yeah, we want students to learn how to clap Mary Had a Little Lamb. But what might be wrong with it? So here are some of the problems. Using their hands, that's a little kind of, how else are you going to clap? I don't know. Maybe you could stomp your feet, but it's unnecessary. And I want you to be thinking about this example when you're constructing your own learning outcomes. Will be able to clap is not a good learning outcome because you can't observe it. You can't observe an ability. You can observe a behavior. So you want to be sure that you're being very specific with behaviors. It's very easy to construct a learning outcome that says students will know how to blah, blah, blah. Students will be able to blah, blah, blah. Those are not good learning outcomes. You want to actually use the action verb that's going to really describe the behavior. And finally, the conditions here will be with 90% accuracy. The degree, excuse me, the degree with 90% accuracy. Can you observe that? What does 90% accuracy of clapping really look like? You need to be able to measure it and observe it. So think about that if you're going to use a degree and a condition in your learning outcome. Okay, so that was our example there. Oh, let's go back here for a second. So here are some better examples of higher level learning. And I'm not going to read these to you, but you can see we've got good action verbs. They're specific enough, yet broad enough for you to be able to construct activities, demonstrations, and whatnot in your instruction. You should use these learning outcomes to structure your instruction. Okay, so we went a little quicker through that material, which is good. I'm trying to keep an eye on the time here. We're up to activity number 2. So back to your activity sheet. Activity number 2 is the next page in your activities sheet. I would like you to do some thinking now about what you know about Spokane Community College and Antelope Valley. And based on what you know about the programs and the types of students that are there, pick some kind of instructional need that you might want to fill if you're in there in that library. And sketch out who the audience might be, as specific as you want. What will your overall instructional goal be? And why that's important. And then, if you can, use the ABCD method or Bloom's taxonomy with the wheel and the verbs. Draft 3 or 4 higher level learning outcomes, as many as you can. What will students be able to do when you are finished? And how will you be able to tell? Okay, and then we'll discuss. So I've got 12:51 here. Clearly we need a little more time. So let's take 5 minutes to sketch these out. They don't have to be in great detail. Let's take 5 minutes to fill this out. And then we'll reconvene at 12:56, 12:57 or so. Of course, if you have questions at any time, just pipe up or put them in the chat area. Okay, how are we doing? Do you want a little more time, or are we ready to talk a little bit about learning outcomes?
I have about 4 outcomes ready. I don't know how good they are, but I'm ready to discuss, but can also take time to refine if others are still working.
Oh,
I have 2.
okay, great. Stephanie?
So I took my example from the Spokane Community College. I selected a audio engineer. I didn't identify anything else about this audio engineer or group of audio engineers. And my goal was for them to select or evaluate clips based on what copyright status these audio clips had. The implications of learning this, or the importance of it, is when they work in the business field, they could get sued or get their business sued if they use a clip for which they have not found the appropriate authorization. So then I started sketching out a variety of different outcomes, and as I did this, as I often realize, I want students to learn too much, and I quickly got a sense of the scope of what I would want the instruction to be, and I'm already thinking in my head, well, maybe I'll pare this down because they're probably doing practical things in the classroom and aren't brought to the library very often, perhaps. And then when you look at Bloom's taxonomy wheel, like you said, the lower level stuff is important, especially for folks who may not know certain terminologies. And that's why I felt a little hesitant picking an outcome like identify the different copyright statuses and the symbology associated with them. But it's absolutely essential before you can do complicated things like designing a workflow for selecting audio clips. The other 2 learning outcomes I was drafting was to differentiate between pirated and official clips. And I thought I had another one, but I guess I only have 3. So those are my 3 outcomes.
Those are brilliant. Wow, you got a lot done. I think that's wonderful. Let's go through and hear from Jenny and Megan next, and then we'll come back together and talk about what this was like. So Jenny, you want to go next?
Sure. I chose nursing students at Antelope Valley College. So the nursing students are all getting AAs and they want to transfer to BA programs. And the goal that I chose for them is they should be critical of health information sources, because I have cousins who are like doctors and things like that, and we always ask them about health stuff, like ask them for advice. So I'm sure as nursing students, people will like share, you know, source like health articles with them and ask them, oh, is this like latest fad thing like a good thing to do? So I created 2 learning outcomes. One of them is the learner will critique newspaper articles related to the health topics. And the second one is the learner will locate credible sources to refute or confirm the claims in the health sources.
Oh, those
So
are
that's
great.
as far as I got.
No, that's great. That's great. I like how it's, I agree. We have health professionals in our family too, and we're always asking them questions.
Yeah.
Especially now. And, you know, these, you know, current events often make a big difference with what's important in our communities.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, no, I like the, you also had great action verbs, and that's a great set of learning outcomes so far. Okay, who's next? I've forgotten who did what.
It's
Who do we
Megan.
leave
I can go. I was more thinking about, I wasn't thinking of one particular major or student, but I was thinking about how with the prevalence of certificate programs that these students often also take like a career development class. So I wrote my stuff about that. So the audience would be students in the career development class, and they would be researching their future careers and the people who might be able to help them in the career. And so for the learning outcomes, I put students in the class will compare the different roles of individuals in their future field. Students will investigate a number of company websites to locate individuals they can target with their needs. And students will outline how to best communicate with that person based on what that person cares about.
Wow, those are, you know, what I love about this is that these are all so very different. When you say communicate with someone based on what they care about, what, can you tell me a little more about that?
So I think what I was doing was like more like what are the general roles in most of the places that they might be trying to get employment, like the different levels of, you know, maybe supervisors or managers. But then when, like, I was imagining how students sometimes have to reach out for informational interviews. And so how you research a particular individual who you know is in like the role that you need to communicate with, but you want to know more about, like, you know, what do they care about helping you? Like, why would that person want to help you? And then thinking about that as you're, you know, outlining how you would communicate with them about, you know, wanting an informational interview or wanting, you know, some advice or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. These are such great examples. Now, can I ask the group, what did you use? Did you use the Bloom's taxonomy verb wheel? Did you use ABCD? What tool or other knowledge did you draw on to complete this exercise?
I used the Bloom's wheel.
I use the wheel also.
All blooms all the time, I guess.
Yeah, we're bloomers. Go us. Yeah, it is a very useful thing. And as I said earlier, there's a lot of different versions of this out there with a lot of different levels of detail. So you can explore that and find the one that works for you, or maybe a set of them, and you can put it up on your bulletin board like I have mine and look at it many times a day and enjoy that. We have more questions here. These are for you to think about going forward once we're gone from our workshop in your workplace, and as you're constructing your instruction. You want to think about the evidence that will show whether your students are actually achieving these objectives. You know, what behaviors do you want to see, and how are they different? What characteristics do they have? What have they learned, and how do they show it? So that's just some food for thought in this activity. We're going to keep going, being mindful of the time. These next two modules go pretty quickly. So now that we've sketched out those learning outcomes, you're ready to get to the meat and bones of designing the instruction itself, the content, the activities, the assessments, and so on. Now, we are not going to design actual instruction in this class because, you know, we could spend weeks on that. But what I do want to do is provide you again with a couple of good models and some good theory that you can use to refer back to when as you're building out your instructional program. So Merrill, I think it's M. David Merrill, the seminal article that describes this, it's a nice short readable article, is listed in your reference list at the end, but we'll go through it kind of quickly here. These principles of instruction, learning is promoted when we see a real world problem, a real world task that students can identify with. We use existing knowledge as a foundation for new knowledge. We want to see a demonstration of new knowledge, and the student applies and is able to integrate that knowledge into their lives. So let's go over these quickly, one at a time. You know, the real world nature of a problem, an information problem, a question, is a real motivating factor. As you probably know, it makes sense. The person has a stake in finding out the answer to the question or the solution to a problem. You know, if I'm hungry, I'm going to go find something to eat. Maybe I feel like making a vegetable lasagna, but I've never made one before, so I want to find out how. I'm motivated to do that. So you want to find a way to stimulate that natural curiosity for students. And sometimes in an academic setting, this is not always that easy. Sometimes we have an imposed question, an imposed query. The teacher has assigned, the academic teacher has assigned an assignment or whatever, a paper to write. And the students may not be as motivated. Maybe they're motivated to get a grade, but maybe not so much in the content. So we have to kind of find ways to help them develop their own sense of curiosity about whatever topic it is. So as you can see, I hope you can see there's a real difference here from starting with a content that we want to impart to the student. We're starting with the student and a real world question or problem that they will be motivated to answer. So learning is also promoted when we prime students to get them to talk about what they already know. We need to be able to get them to link back to stuff they already know. You know, Vygotsky and his scaffolding theory is very much underlies this activation piece. Build on what you know. You know, it helps students avoid feeling overwhelmed. They'll be less stressed. So in this respect, you know, we hear a lot about pre-testing and post-testing skills or knowledge, and a pre-test can be counterproductive in some respects if it serves to stress a student and introduce vocabulary that they're unfamiliar with. So be aware of this, be sensitive to this. But this is a way to get students started, thinking about what they already know that can be used to help them build, give them a foundation to build on. So learning is promoted when we demonstrate the knowledge, not just describe it. And this is sort of gets back to that, the learning style, the different learning styles, you know, whether you're watching somebody do something or listening to it, listening to a description or reading about it. Demonstration is very important. You know, it's kind of it's a type of assistance, and there's more than one kind of demonstration. You could have a video, you could model a behavior. We use a lot of internet sources, so I would say watch out for sites, websites, LibGuides that are too busy. Sometimes there's simply too much going on, and it can be overwhelming, so watch out for this. We can deal with, as professionals, information professionals, we're skilled at dealing with too much information, but our students are not. So we want to take care that we are really demonstrating and focused on how to work through a specific problem and not overwhelming them with too much. Okay, so learning is promoted when they have to use that knowledge to actually do something. There's a term for diminishing coaching. When you help somebody out a lot at the beginning of learning a task, and as they work through different pieces of a task, you let them do more and more on their own and just kind of be available to answer questions or help them make corrections as they go. Let the student do more and more of the task, bit by bit, small steps. But the point is to let the student apply it in their own way, in their own fashion, in their own timing. And finally, we find that learning is promoted when knowledge is integrated into their world, transferred into their own lives. And a great way that we see this is having students share their knowledge with others. You know that old saying, you don't really know something unless you have to teach someone else. That's very much what integration is all about. Having students present something or somehow show that they've, show what they've learned, show what they know how to do. And I'm sure much of this is familiar to you, but it's important to make it explicit in how you construct your instructional session or class or whatever it is, event, whatever it is. Now, as far as the mode, the format, how you actually go about presenting things and interacting with your students, there are so many choices, probably too many choices. And we're not going to go through those here. You can read about them, you can talk to others about them, you can attend other sessions at this wonderful conference to hear more about each of these. Grassian and Kaplowitz, the text I referred to earlier, also the Fordham LibGuide. There are many good sites out here that have a lot of information here. And so the kinds of things you want to be thinking about, some of these we've already thought about, the audience level, the size, how many are you trying to reach? That will certainly make a difference. If you have 3 in the class or 30, makes a difference in what you're able to do, what mode and format. You know, what does the institution expect? Maybe there is a credit-bearing course, maybe there is not, and so on and so on. I just provide this slide as kind of a checklist. An incomplete checklist, certainly, but some of the things that you want to think about as you plan your instruction. So here we are, very quickly. We came up on activity number 3. So this is our last activity. And activity number 3 is, I want you to come back and think about those instructional outcomes you designed earlier. So how might you apply Merrill's principles here? And I've got a space on the worksheet for you to sketch out the real world problem, how you will activate prior knowledge, how you are going to demonstrate what you want them to learn. And you can just be, you know, we're not sketching out the whole course here, just a little example of for each of these. How do you think students might apply that knowledge, and how might you have them integrate? So let's take a good 5 minutes and think about this and sketch out your answers. And we'll come back around 1:21 or so. Okay, how's everyone doing? Let's come back, and even if you don't worry if you haven't finished up, um, but let's go around the room and see what you came up with. Who'd like to start? Stephanie?
How'd you know I was ready to talk about my audio engineers? Okay.
Go ahead.
So here it is. Here's that learning outcome. Differentiate between pirated and official clips. So the real world situation I kind of outlined earlier, you could present them with a case study of an audio engineer who decided to use a clip and didn't get the copyright permissions, and show the kinds of letters and the fines associated with that kind of decision. And you can also show a example of the real world problem of paying, an exorbitant fee, and how that there's that cost benefit analysis that you have to do, and the ways that you might consider some sort of open access clip or Creative Commons clip, or an artist who's known for wanting their work to be used and not requiring a payment, and maybe just requiring attribution. So it would be interesting to start off with those case studies. Some other things for them to think about is how they've experienced either viewing or hearing about people using pirated clips. Like there's blurred lines, which there were allegations that parts of it were stolen from another song. Maybe there's some things in pop culture that will be interesting for them to talk about, and also less confrontational than maybe talking about, how they have an entire torrented library of illegally downloaded clips. Maybe we don't want to out someone like that, and instead talk about famous celebrity cases. That might be good. But then we get to demonstration, and I don't like database demonstrations, but I think it's kind of necessary, at least in part, for this particular outcome, where you have to show where can you see these when you're in YouTube, or when you're in maybe Naxos, if there was a equivalent music database that the library subscribed to. You would want to show them where exactly they can find the information they need to evaluate about copyright status and contact information for using the clip. And then an activity for them would be more case studies. So just, passing around resources and having them do their own evaluation. There's this song on this site and the same song is on this site. Which one should you use and why? And have them maybe do small groups or think pair shares on that. How will they integrate this? That would be an interesting wrap-up discussion. I would want them to look for, when they are a part of, whatever audio design process, when do they raise their hand and say, hey, I think we need to go in a different direction because of the costs of this kind of music that you're looking for, or the time it takes to get the copyright on this. However, I do know about this open access source. I've probably talked too long, but those were my thoughts for this particular learning outcome.
No, that's marvelous. Stephanie, thank you so much. I like your thinking is very practical along these lines, and you use a lot of active, you're engaging the students very actively, and that's wonderful. Okay, let's go on to Megan. Would you like to share yours?
Sure. So I was thinking about the student who's researching future employers, and I was thinking to activate prior knowledge, that before we start poking around and looking, that I would have students have a conversation about their assumptions of what they already know about the field, like who their bosses could be, or like how easy or hard it is to move up through the ranks of the kind of profession they want to be in, to just discuss like, what do they already know, or what do they think they know? And then I was going to demonstrate in front of them, taking my assumptions about a career field. So I would just say those out loud and say, you know, my assumptions are XYZ. Let's see if they're true. And so then I would do some guided web exploration on my topic, students following my topic together, looking at either career websites that I'm, you know, like a curated list of career websites, us using to either confirm or refute my assumption that I have said to the class. And then I would have them do it for themselves. But I also often like students to trade topics so that they're not so, one, like swayed by what they want to be happening, and also like heartbroken if that's not what they find. So I would have students trade careers and research each other's. And then for applying the new knowledge, which to me is basically like confirming what they know or overriding what they thought they knew with the new information, like writing a self-reflection on, you know, whether their expectations about what they thought were true or not, and how does that make them feel. Yeah, that was the arc as far as I got with that. I was thinking like what I think is difficult maybe is that, you know, when I write out how I think a class is going to go on paper, and you don't get a dress rehearsal with students. So like, I think some exercises or some activities are interesting and will definitely further like their knowledge on the thing, but how it works out in a live scenario is always interesting.
That is so true. That is so true. A little mental exercise I sometimes go through is to think of all the possible things that could go wrong. And I don't just mean about like technology or something not working, just unexpected reactions from students, or, you know, a discussion question that's just a dud. But here again, you can see how really engaging the students in thinking about what the real world motivator is for them to be there and to be learning, and what prior knowledge. And I like how you have them really thinking and reflecting about their expectations, and that's really great. That is really great. Okay, Jenny.
And I had the nursing students. So their real world problem or task is their patient or their family member or their friend shares an article with them about a health related thing. So it could be like a new health fad, something that says they have to eat this type of food to be healthy. It could even be anti-vaxxers or stuff about coronavirus. So I'll have them think about a time that this happened, where someone told you something or they shared some story with you and you weren't sure if it was true, and you proved them wrong by investigating the answer. So I would demonstrate it by using a real world example. So whatever health topic that's in the news, I'd use that as an example, find a claim in an article, and then show them how I'd investigate whether or not this is true. And then I'd have the students get into groups, maybe hand out like different sets of articles with different claims, and have them in groups like try to find out the answer and see, is the claim that this source is making, is this true or not? Yeah. And then have them think about how they can continue to do this throughout their lives.
Yeah, no, I like how you're connecting this with the things that are going on today. That always gets attention, I think. You can also ask the students to share, and this is true for all of these projects. Ask the students to share an experience of a claim about something. There's a lot of clickbait out there, as we know, and if you get people thinking and talking about that, that's a great way to activate their prior knowledge and what they think about is required for this kind of work and this kind of career, what that work environment might be like, and looking into the websites that will help support or kind of alter their expectations. Thank you. These are all really wonderful examples. So for the rest of you, what was difficult about this exercise? Is there anything that you have other questions about? On applying Merrill's principles is what I want to focus on here.
I didn't have any. I thought it was pretty, I think the prompting questions helped me engage those principles.
Do you have other examples of demonstration methods that incorporate active learning? I feel like I sometimes get in a rut with the same old, same old. Are there ones that you've heard of, you've used yourself, or students have brought up that you think are particularly creative?
That's a really good question. And I have to say there's probably as many examples of this as there are topics that you can investigate. And so I would say, you know, off the top of my head, I'm drawing a blank because that's what happens when you put me on the spot. But what I think there's great examples of how you can approach this thinking in Grassian and Kaplowitz, and also just continuing to dig into that Bloom's taxonomy with those active verbs, and use those to you know, structure questions and inquiry and activities, especially that stimulate students to think. I'm sorry I can't be more specific. That's sort of a non-answer. I punted that one.
And I apologize for putting you on the spot. I just want to share with folks who are watching that sometimes when I'm in a rut, I'll return to Cross's collaborative learning techniques.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also a site, Project Cora, where you can go through folks' materials that they've shared for their instruction sessions. And often that'll give me an idea for mixing up a workshop that I think has gone a little stale, or there's an element that I want to change just a little bit.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing those. I wonder, would you be able to email me the citations to those items? And then, Jenny, we can include these on the website with this.
Sounds good. Will do.
Wonderful. Thank you. Are there any other burning questions? Looking at the time, I'd like to move on. The next section goes pretty quick, but I don't want to miss a question if there's a question out there. Okay, I'm hearing crickets, so let's move along. All right, where am I? Okay, here we go. So in this next section, we're going to talk about two models that are very helpful in using to help us understand how we evaluate our instruction. And you may or may not have heard of these, or the concepts might be familiar to you and you didn't know that this was what they were called. So the two things we're going to look at, one is the theory of change logic model, and we're also going to look at Kirkpatrick's model for evaluating training. Let's just dive right in. You know, so what is a logic model? And I'm pretty sure you've seen this or you've heard about this because it is very popular now. We focus on this now in grant writing and grant evaluation when you're planning out a program. A grant funder will want to know what resources you're going to be using, needing to conduct a program of any kind. So this is a little broader than just instruction. What activities you will be conducting, what do you expect the outcomes or outputs to be? I think I should have, under short term it should say outputs, but it can say outcomes, that's all right. And longer term outcomes. What do you expect to happen as a result of this program? And it's a great way to get the details of what you want to do down on paper. It's a great way to illustrate what you're going to need, especially if you're doing like a budget request or kind of scoping out a higher level plan. It's a great planning tool. I mean, you could use this to plan your next vacation, honestly. So it's broader than just instruction. Here are the elements in a little more detail. Under resources, you would have anything that's got to go in to make this thing happen, whether it's an instructional program or anything. You've got funding, you've got to pay for people to do the work, to plan the thing, to do the thing. You need a place to do the thing. The activities are all the actions that make up the program, of course. And then you have short-term outcomes. These tend to be the things that we count. The number of attendees we reached, the number of products we produced, whatever that is. And those longer term outcomes is what was the impact that we wanted to see. Now for an instructional program in particular, here's just a quick sketch of what, kind of a generic instructional program might look like. You need the funding to pay for the teaching staff and the classroom and the computers and all those things. You're going to develop the lesson, teach the students, assess the learning. You're going to reach some students. You're going to have a certain amount of time with them. And then you're going to be concerned with their growth and learning, the change in behavior, whether they like the class or not, will they come back? This is the logic model. Program theory is a wonderful way to structure your evaluation because you can really evaluate anything at any level in this model. You can look at whether resources were adequate. Did you have enough funding? Did you have enough time? Was the lesson appropriate and right for those students? Did the students learn anything? Did you reach the number that you expected? And did you achieve that longer term impact that you had hoped for? So you can evaluate any stage here. Some of us tend to focus on one more than the other, depending on the purpose. For funding, you might, for developing a budget request, you might be more concerned with the resource end and the output end to see if your instruction was cost effective on a per student cost, for example. But for the learning impact on students, you might be more interested in those longer term outcomes. So here we're moving on to our second item, Kirkpatrick's model. And this was a model that was developed back in the 50s for evaluating training in the workplace, but it is very much applicable to the kinds of instructional programming we do in libraries. And so Kirkpatrick did a lot of research and came up with this model that has 4 different levels. And if you Google this, you will find there are some models that have actually 5 levels, but let's just do these 4 for now. At the first level, you've got, the reaction to the training, and you would measure this with a satisfaction survey right in the room. Did they like the teacher? Were they comfortable? Were they interested in the subject? Level 2 learning is concerned with whether they did actually learn anything. Has anything changed in their understanding of a topic or skill at doing a task? And that's really pretty much in the moment. You would be able to assess this in the moment, maybe in a survey at the end of the class, maybe a little post-test or quiz or observation of them demonstrating how they are applying the knowledge or integrating the knowledge and so on. At the third level, we have behavior, and this is, we're referring to behavior that's a little further down the line, a little later on. Are they using what they've learned? Has it helped them change the way they approach solving an information problem, for example? And finally, level 4 results is closely related to behavior, but we're looking a little further out, and we're looking in Kirkpatrick's world, in the workplace, you would want to see some kind of improvement or impact on an organization to to what degree were those outcomes reached. For our purposes, behavior and results might be a little more closely related. Maybe for us in the information world, in libraries, working with students in an academic setting, we might be concerned with whether their GPA went up, or did they see some impact on their educational experience as a result of your instruction. And you might also be able to reach out to faculty and get their impression on whether their students are better prepared for a particular type of academic activity as a result. So that's Kirkpatrick. I just wanted to introduce that, and we've got the foundational documents that cover this evaluating training model and also logic modeling in your resource list. And I just wanted to introduce those briefly here. As you know, there are a lot of assessment measures and techniques that you can employ to evaluate your instruction at any of these levels. And I've just listed a couple here. In your resource list, the Angelo and Cross text on classroom assessment techniques is a wonderful resource. A lot of it is, of course, it's geared toward academic discipline teaching, but so much of it is really very applicable and things that you can modify a little bit to use in library instructional settings. And here are just a couple of examples of assessments that I've used in little workshops. And this is just kind of a, this is an assessment that gets at the reaction part. And it's just a little satisfaction survey you would hand out at the end of a workshop. And it just deals with, you know, whether materials were helpful, how was the instructor prepared, and overall, how'd you rate the training, what was useful, what could be improved, blah, blah, blah. All that kind of stuff that you would want to know, that we often want to know, so that we can say at the end of the year in our annual report that, you know, we had this many students and they thought that materials were helpful. Here's another assessment. Here's an example of one way you might structure a pre and a post test. And what we did here, this was a specific workshop on using volunteers in libraries and managing volunteers in libraries. And so what we did was we took the learning outcomes and we used those to sketch out sort of knowledge or skills areas that we would ask students to rate. So this maps directly onto the curriculum, the learning outcomes, and the specific activities that we used. You could give them, what we did in this case was we gave them this pre-test before they attended the workshop, and then we gave it to them again about 2 weeks later, which we were hoping to get at, you know, that behavior and learning change over time after they've had a chance to perhaps use what they learned in the workplace. So again, there are many, many assessment techniques. A couple of links here that I thought were interesting. Of course, there's so many of this out there. The University of Texas Libraries has a really nice information literacy toolkit. If you haven't seen it, go there. All kinds of things. Angelo and Cross I've referenced here again. We don't have time to go into all of these. This is a whole nother workshop. Okay, so we're wrapping up our session here, and we talked about how we focus on learning versus what we're teaching at them, knowing your students. Hopefully we've given you some techniques that will help you structure activities that will really enable learning, and how to tell whether we're really focusing on higher order learning in our learning outcomes, using the logic model to do planning as well as evaluation. And we talked about different ways of evaluating training from Kirkpatrick. And that was our workshop. So I want to open the floor here to, any questions you have. Are there things you want to know more about? Any areas still fuzzy for you?
No, I think I just have a lot of things to read up on later. Thank you.
Okay. Well, that was a goal of mine.
Just wanted to say thank you so much for this comprehensive and basically a one-shot of intro to library instruction. I love it, and it reminds me the importance of coming back to basics, because I'm just workshopping things in my head for my own situation at my library, and one reflection that I have is the way we can engage with institutional assessment at varying levels. So for example, if in a meeting you hear a lot of information about alumni, what's going well for them, what isn't, that could provide fodder for those real world problems that you can anonymize and present to students and say, well, what if you ran into this as a practicing whatever, audio engineer, nurse, minister, whatever it is, and then address these things that are coming up for actual alumni with the new students going through. So thank you for getting my mind churning on all of these. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Good. That was another one of my goals, was to get you thinking, give you tools that you can go back and refer to as you kind of mull over all these concepts, because this was a lot to cover in one shot. I agree. I'm glad you brought up talking about the overall institution, the academic institution you operate in, because libraries really do need to extend out their thinking and their value and be able to tell these stories of how we reach students and why what we do is important and how we do what we do makes a difference. Okay, well, being mindful of the time, we went a bit over, not too much over, and I hope that's okay with our viewers and listeners at home. But we're going to close our session now. We're going to stop recording, and thank you all for attending. It's really been a pleasure sharing this with you. And if you have any questions at all, here's my contact information. And that's in your handout, and here's some of those references and resources that I talked about. Thank you all for coming. Please be sure to get in touch if you have questions. Okay, bye-bye.